And take a breath. Breath. Our theme this month, as we're starting a new month, is consistency. My topic today is choosing spiritual consistency. And I want to do a shout out, with this being Labor Day weekend. I want to do a shout out to the workers, particularly those workers right now in the midst of COVID who are putting it all on the line to make sure that the world keeps running and that people can get groceries and their medicines and get their packages without going to the stores, and to care for people in the hospitals, and all the various things that are going on. I personally am a firm supporter of labor. I come from a proud tradition of educators, particularly those in public school districts. And I know what the power of their labor unions were able to do. And I think it's appropriate in this month of consistency to honor labor and all what Labor Day represents, in them being able to get some consistency in their work schedules, in their care, in their benefits, in how they were treated. And we say thank you, because all of us are here upon the shoulders of those who've come before us. I say choosing spiritual consistency. As human beings, we are innately consistent. That's good news, and that's not so good news, depending upon the perspective. But consistency is one of our greatest defense mechanisms. We're creatures of habit. We learn things, and the more that we repeat it, the more embodied it becomes, embedded in our consciousness, so that we can be consistent with it and don't have to keep thinking about it. So once we learn how to walk and we learn those motions, we can be consistent in that without having to stop and think about it. Once we learn to speak, or any of these motor skills, it becomes a part of who we are. In that vein, it really works in our favor, because we can count on certain things. We've learned it, we've got it, it's embedded, we can step out on it, we know it's going to be there, and we're not having to constantly reinvent the wheel. This is a marvelous thing about the way in which we are consistent. However, in the same way that as human beings we are consistent, that we emulate that which has been presented to us. And this practice happens so early on that we're not thinking about it, and it's not choice. If you grow up in a certain environment that speaks a certain language, you're going to speak that language. Not because you've chosen it, not because you were thinking about it, but because that's what you heard. That's what you were exposed to. If there were certain habits or practices around whatever, around the way that you eat, the way that you dress, how you fix your hair, where you worship, like whatever these kinds of basic things are that we are exposed to, we wind up emulating them. We are terribly consistent. Everybody has a pattern, and we are consistent with that. I remember when it finally hit me one day that even those that try not to have a pattern, that's their pattern. That consistency doesn't mean that you're always doing the exact same thing in the same way all the time. But it does mean that we have some sort of pattern, we have some sort of approach, ways in which we're doing things, and we tend to repeat that. So we're even consistently inconsistent. Let that sink in. If the lack of routine is your routine, then that's your pattern. All of us have this pattern. And because we are exposed to things so early, and we emulate these things so early, they become what we often refer to in the diversity field as unexamined assumptions. Unexamined assumptions. This is the way that it is. We're just plodding around, going through our day, doing what everybody else has been doing. And unbeknownst to us, we wind up repeating the status quo. Listen to what I'm saying. The status quo is the default setting. The status quo is that setting that's been established by collective consciousness through repetition. We're born into it. We walk into it. And unless we challenge it, unless we choose something very consciously, very differently, we're going to be perpetuating that default system. Much as I was talking about language, we can learn any language. You can learn any language. But unless you do something to put yourself in the position to learn the other language, by default, you're going to be consistent in whatever that language was that you were first exposed to. When I say language, I'm not just talking about a linguistic language. We are introduced to languages of love. We're introduced to languages of sharing and how do we relate to one another. We're introduced to all of these different systems and methodologies. And like I said, unless we consciously choose to do something else, we're on default. So we don't have to get into a lot of judgment or blame about it. It's kind of just the way that it is. It's far less important, all the influences that got us into this default as far as our spirituality is concerned. What's more important is that we stay woke, that we become consciously aware of the patterns, that we choose to be consistent in ways that are affirming our spirituality. See, the stuff of the world, these default positions of the world, these languages that I was speaking about that the world gives us about life and the economy and relationships and religion and all of the rest of that, it's man-made stuff. It's out of the human collective consciousness. And it's often born out of all the stresses and strifes about ego and competition, about hierarchy and structures, about haves and have-nots and lack and limitation. So a lot of these things that we have in the outer world may not be consistent with our spiritual truth. And I would dare say a vast majority of the time it's actually not. Because those languages that we are learning from the world are about protecting our otherness. They are about the lack and limitation consciousness that come out of this sense of separation that we have, separate from our good, separate from each other, separate from the divine, separate from whatever. And then out of that sense of separation, there's all these different things that we get into to try to fill this existential kind of sense of void or emptiness that we have. The psyche can have a sense of a whole, H-O-L-E, but yet on the spiritual level, we are whole, W-H-O-L-E. So one of the first things that spiritual consistency will require of us is choice. It's choice. Right now, we as a species are at a point in evolutionary history that no human beings have ever been in before. Through our information and our technology age, we are able to communicate with each other around the world in nanoseconds. Through the airwaves, we are being bombarded with more information and signals than has ever been in human history. Our nervous system isn't even equipped to handle the amount of stimuli that's coming at us. And that's just the stuff that we actually tune into. So if you're looking at television, for example, or you're on the radio, you're tuned into one channel, but there are thousands of other channels and frequencies that are going on all around you. And such as it is in the human consciousness, there are all of these signals that are going on out there. And we have to be very deliberate about which channels we tune into. We have to be really careful because as energetic beings, we have a frequency and we resonate with whatever it is that captures our attention long enough. It would be the equivalent of kind of singing along. If you keep getting exposed to a certain song or a little ditty, you may not even like it. I remember I used to wind up singing commercials I didn't even like. But if we are exposed to it long enough, we start resonating with that. We start synchronizing with that. I remember being very fascinated in biology when I learned that women, childbearing age women, in close proximity with one another, start to synchronize with each other's ovulation cycles. Just through the pheromones that we are emitting. That which we become exposed to, that which keeps our attention, that which we are surrounded by, we become impacted by. And if we want spiritual consistency, then the choice that we have to make is transcendent. Transcendent. We have to live in the and. Yes, there's whatever is going on, the facts. I'm not telling you to ignore the facts. I'm saying don't give them the last word. Don't give them the last word. Don't let them be the end-all, be-all gospel. It's just a fact. It's a fact until it's not. And even the extent to the objectivity of that fact is questionable. What we call objective is just our collective subjective agreement. Before I got into all this metaphysical stuff, I remember when I kind of figured that out as a preteen. And I was questioning sight. And I was thinking, okay, I'm looking at this particular color. And in my mind, once again, this consistency and what we've been taught, I've been taught that that color is green. That's what I think when I say green. But it occurred to me, I don't know what's in somebody else's eye. And that maybe what they're seeing isn't actually what I'm seeing. We just collectively have decided to call that thing green. But perhaps in actuality, if you were really looking at a color wheel, that what I see is green, to them is actually what I would have called purple. So we're looking at the same stuff. We've just collectively decided to call it this thing or that thing. Take a breath. As a spiritual being, we live in infinite potentiality. Well, that feels like a big concept. But let's just think about that for a moment. Infinite potentiality. Is there a ceiling on how much love there can be? Is there a ceiling on how much art and music and creative expression can be in the world? Is there a ceiling on imagination? Is there a ceiling, not S-E-A-L, but ceiling, it's part of the problem in English language, like a top, an upper limit on how much you're able to feel one with the divine? Is there an upper limit on how interconnected you could feel with the planet and the animals, and the four-legged and the winged creatures? Is there a limit on how connected you can feel to the elements, to the water and the air and the earth and the fire? Is there a limit on the amount of wisdom that you can tap into from the ages? Or the amount of wisdom that you can tap into that hasn't even been thought about yet? If your answer to any of this is no, then why do we live like that? Why do we act like whatever we've done in the past is as much as we'll ever be able to do again? Or as much as anybody else did is as much as that can ever happen. You know, when we see children, not all of us, but some of us, will see in that child that sense of that infinite potentiality. And somehow or another, as the years go by, it's as though there's something in our minds that limits that potentiality. Now, there may be limits to how it expresses, the particular avenue that it takes to show up, but the potentiality itself is boundless. If it doesn't show up this way, it'll show up another way. And that's where we get stuck as human beings, because we want the consistency in that form. We want the consistency in that container, in that arena. We want it in that relationship, in this body form, in this particular job, in that particular house, in this religious community. But that's not the way that it works. The consistency is this capacity to keep restoring, to keep rebirthing, to keep generating anew. Anew. But it may not always look the same. And we're too busy sometimes trying to repeat. Where consistency in our minds means I've got to get that again. The consistency is in the vibration. The consistency is in the resonance. The consistency is in your willingness to align with the divine. The consistency doesn't need to be in this outer expression, and can I keep doing this particular thing? But can I relate to, embody, connect with the spiritual principle under that, keep saying yes to it, and let it find more and more ways to express itself through me? So can I keep being bigger places of love? Can I keep being bigger places of forgiveness? Can I stretch my own imagination on just how much I can share and care? That's the kind of consistency that we want. Breathe that in for a moment. That's the kind of consistency that I'm talking about. Now is not the time to lower your vibration. Now is not the time to sink into the collective consciousness of otherness, of discouragement, of fear. I think it was Churchill who said there is nothing to fear but fear itself. You don't want to do that. Now is the time, right here in September 2020. Now is the time to pull out the stops. To pull out the stops. I mean, dig deep within the reservoirs to tap into the hope, the strength, the courage, the love, the oneness, the visions of possibility. You meet yourself. These unexamined assumptions. I can hear back within my head now, your dreams are waiting for you to come true. Your dreams are waiting for you to come true. Don't be fooled by the appearances. Don't be fooled by the appearances. Because to the naked eye, your moments of breakthrough look like breakdown. Don't be fooled by the appearances. The moments of rebirth look like death. Labor's not pretty. Labor's not fun. That birthing process, if you didn't know that a new life was coming into being, you would just know this woman's dying. I don't know why it's that way. I really don't question the universe anymore, but in terms of divine design, I really do wonder what exactly the divine had in mind in live birth. Why you want this big thing to come through this little bitty space? I'm just saying. I don't know why. But it's the way that it is. So in the inner, so in the outer. We are in labor now. Collectively, humanity, we are in labor. We're all of it. We're the baby, we're the mama, we're the midwife, we're even the impregnating daddy. We're all of it. We're all of it. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Just be consistent. Push! And breathe. Push! And breathe. You can't birth with just pushing. We can't push our way into this next evolutionary phase. The tide, the ebb, the flow, the inhale, the exhale, the push, and then you got to relax. You got to relax. You got to get your strength up for the next push. If all you're doing is pushing, it's not going to happen. If all you're doing is chilling, it's not going to happen. This consistency in the birthing process is what we have to do individually as people and within our own consciousness. This way that spirituality works, the way forward, what we want to think of as forward, it's more like a cha-cha dance, where you take a couple of forward and you take a couple of back, a little forward and back. It's that inner, outer, inhale, exhale. You move forward, you go back. It's not just a linear foom. So when you choose to heal, when you choose to love unconditionally, when you choose to create a world of justice and fairness and equity, it doesn't mean you get to just leap over there. Not how it works. Because of things I said before, the way that we keep being consistent with the unexamined assumptions, the way that we keep repeating the default, it's like there's a bungee cord on our butts. It's like we can only get so far, and boom, we're pulled back. You only get so far in trusting and whatnot, and boom, your fears bring you back. You get so far in your progress of wanting to have some breakthroughs financially, and then boom, all that old fears about not enoughness is like pulling you back. We got to cut the cord. Just like that umbilical cord, you got to cut the cord. The way forward means we also have to have some reclamation of the past. There's reconciliation that needs to take place. If you want to go from addiction to sobriety, stopping the drinking may be the easiest part of the process. It's the having to take a look at why were we drinking? What is all of that stuff? What is all of that wounded, unhealed stuff? You got to take a look at it. That is the road to healing. Once again, it may not look pretty. You cut your hand, before you get the new skin, there might be some pus. There could be a scab. There could be a scar. There could be any number of things. You don't just go from cut to new skin. It's not how it works. And it doesn't work that way collectively either. We're at this watershed breakthrough moment in our human consciousness. I've been a diversity trainer for decades, and I've never seen a moment like this, when there are so many people who are willing to take the blinders off, who are willing to take a look at our collective past, the default buttons, the unexamined assumptions, the way we've just been sleepwalking, emulating the past without really thinking about its implications. I've never seen a moment like this, where there's such an uprising that's saying we can do better, we can be better. And we're willing to do whatever it is that we need to do to get there. But here's the thing that you got to remember about this journey. It's that bungee cord. It's that bungee cord. You try to step out, and the bungee cord's pulling you back. That ego self that doesn't like change. Remember I said the good news and the bad news about consistency. So that survival part of us, that little reptilian brain, it wants to deal in the familiar. It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. A battered wife will often rather stay in the predictability of being battered than to take the chance on the unknown and the newness of exploring her potentiality. That's this downfall about the consistency, because we will stay in the old patterns if we don't try something else. And we're in this energetic battle right now around this push forward to rebirth. Stick it back in the womb. Baby's crowning. There's no bag. Baby's crowning. I can hear Martin Luther King Jr. now in my head. He said, the days of segregation are over. You can be certain of that. The only thing uncertain about it is how costly the segregationists will make the funeral. And that's where we are right now. The days of supremacy, whatever it is, racism, sexism, nationalism, religious supremacy, I can go on and on and on. It's over. It's over. The only thing uncertain about it is how costly the supremacists are making the funeral. You have a choice. You can make it less costly. Your love, your vision, your sense of possibility, consciousness can make it less costly. There can be less bloodshed. Literally, emotionally, figuratively. I'm not saying that you don't be an activist. What I'm saying is that we get to choose whether we are living in the vibration of the potentiality that's consistent with our spiritual nature, or whether we're going to choose to resonate on the energetic field with the bungee cord. It's like spending all your time screaming at the bungee cord and the ancestors for putting it on you, instead of you taking your will and your might and cut it. You can cut the bungee cord. We don't have to be marionettes. You look at what's happening now, and it's like, this is politics. The economy. Black Lives Matter. We just, whatever's going on, we're just stand still. Be still and know me. Know I'm God. Align with that. Love me with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and your neighbor as yourself. That's a full-time job. This is the consistency that we have to choose right now. All of your mind, all of your heart, all of your soul, aligning with the divine. And can you imagine, we'll end on this, but can you imagine if billions of people around the world had their potentiality unleashed? Can you imagine if billions of people on the world weren't stuck in survival mode or just struggling? If we weren't in fear of war and famine and the things that happen from climate change and injustice, can you imagine? It blows my mind to even think of it. But you know what I want to find out? I want to find out. But it has to start somewhere. And will it start with you? Will you be consistent with your practice? Remember I said whatever you do enough becomes habitual. Will you stay in the meditations long enough so that you're meditating when you're not even thinking about it? Will you pray long enough that you're walking around with a praying spirit? Will you forgive often enough that you walk around with a graciousness and a generosity of spirit that prevents you from even getting into too much judgment? Whatever it is that you do, do it. Double down on it. If you garden, garden. If you get it kinesthetically, dance your patuki off. If you read, saturate yourself. You do combinations, whatever you do. Do it. Do it. This collective birth, it's a team effort. I can't push for you. I can't love for you. I can't recalibrate for you. You got to do it. And you show up now. I am going to say one more thing. I wasn't sure if I should, but I would be remiss if I didn't. So, 2 days ago, there was a memo that came out from the White House, from the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. It was covered in Forbes magazine, and the actual letter is available online. This is September the 4th, 2020. Where any kind of diversity and inclusion training programs are being banned. No, and saying it very specifically, no discussion of white privilege or critical race analysis, anything about the nation being racist or having participated in any kind. It makes people uncomfortable. That those programs are to cease and desist, and the memo directs all of the federal, and federal is a lot, all of the federal agencies to investigate and do whatever they can to break the contracts that they have with any groups that are doing any kind of this training. This is part of that making the funeral costly. This is part of that bungee thing on the butt, where you don't want to look. You want to just keep doing this, and you don't want to go back and do the healing. The fierce inventory that the 12-step programs speak of. The amends. You're not whole until you do some restitution. You know, in a few weeks, we're going to be at Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. I mean, every tradition's got its own way of doing it, but the bottom line is the only way through the birthing into the new is you've got to deal with the old. And when you recalibrate, go to a different place of consistency, it will be easier. It will be easier, I promise you.